Listening Fanfiction presents Bend Around the Wind by Skylaya, based off the movie series Avengers from Marvel Universe. Narrated for you by Sierra Face. Chapter 1. Prologue. 3 months. That was the only peace he got after the Battle of New York. Only 3 months! And shit hit the fan. Nothing global, mind you, just your average asshole with too much money and way too many weapons and personal soldiers at his disposal. So Tony didn't have 1 but 2 of his properties totaled, which was just really great. The Stark Tower was already under repair, just like the rest of New York, but his Malibu mansion would take even longer to fix, and to be honest, he couldn't find the energy to get the reconstructions started. He had to move into the family mansion in New York, he knew, but every cell in his body was against the idea. Every room reminded him of his childhood there, and consequently of Howard Stark. And if there was one thing he was most definitely not in the mood for, was a delightful trip down that particular memory lane. Pepper was still in the hospital. The fact was like a parasite inside his chest, crawling, twisting unpleasantly every few seconds, a lot more painful than the shrapnel ever could be. She was not supposed to get caught up in the crossfire. She was not supposed to get hurt, not when Tony got out of the whole debacle with nothing but a few bruises and a cracked rib. But Tony had his suit, of course. Pepper was not so lucky. So here he was, trying to shove down every single one of his issues about the family mansion and get it ready for when Pepper was released. What was he doing instead? He was sitting in his half-destroyed tower with a glass of scotch, avoiding the mansion like the plague! They could have decided to go somewhere, anywhere, Venice, maybe Rome, Tokyo, it didn't matter, but Pepper was insistent. They couldn't just abandon Stark Industries. Tony would have been more than happy to do just that, screw the company, but he didn't have it in him to argue when Pepper, sweet, perfect Pepper, looked at him with those determined eyes. The look was firm, even on her bruised face, and Tony gave in. He still had quite some time before they had to move into the mansion, so a few nights in the tower would change nothing, but would give him some time to get his head in order and his anger under control. Anger as in S.H.I.E.L.D. not bothering to react to Tony's mansion being blown to bits, as in Agent whoever the heck in a suit having the nerve to show up in the hospital after everything was done and over with, just to inform him that they would like to debrief him about the events that took place. That unfortunately Captain Rogers, Agent Barton, and Agent Romanov were away on an important mission. That's why they were not able to come to his aid. Tony told the agent where Fury can shove his debriefing. Sure, he could handle it alone. He did handle it alone. Big brownie point for Tony Stark for keeping the situation under control. But this was not about him. This was about Pepper getting hurt because Tony had no backup. Because S.H.I.E.L.D. had bigger concerns than the maniac trying to destroy Tony's life. Sure, he understood perfectly. He didn't know why he expected anything else. At least Rhodey got there in time. Little late, but just in time. He didn't want to think about what would have happened if he got there too late. Strong wind blew through the room, shaking Tony out of his thoughts. The breeze was cold and made him shiver while reminding him that there were still too many windows not replaced. He stood up and stretched his back and shoulders, walking back to the bar to refill his glass. He stared at the floor while he drank. The dent Hulk made with Loki was no longer there, but it would be hard to forget that spot. He would always see it. "Sir," sounded Jarvis's voice suddenly, "I detect an unusual energy signature in the tower." Tony frowned and put his glass down. "What sort of energy signature?" he asked. "Unidentified, sir. Insufficient data. Further analysis is required. It is, however, rapidly decreasing in strength." "Just great. Keep your sensors sharp. I'm going to take a look. Where?" "It seems to be concentrated in the master bedroom, but it would be inadvisable to approach it without your suit on, Mr. Stark," Jarvis reminded him. "It may very well be a hostile presence." The Mark 7 was still beat up, and he never bothered to fix the Mark 6, so he only had the Mark 5, which was a floor below, where he planned to sleep later. "Well, I can get my suit after I take a look," he decided. "Still unadvisable, sir," Jarvis told him. He wasn't sure what made him ignore the warning. Maybe the drinks he had, or that parasite in that side his chest that reminded him that he got away scot-free because of his suit, while Pepper was going to lie in a hospital bed for weeks. It really didn't matter which it was. The wind was a lot stronger in the bedroom because every window was missing here. The city was almost completely dark outside. Too much damage still, too many buildings without electricity, too many ruins. The setting sun didn't give enough light, so the room was basking in a quite ominous mixture of red glow and shadows. Tony did have electricity in the tower, but not in this room. The repairs were not finished yet. There were cement bags and buckets of paint around him, waiting for the workers to continue their job tomorrow morning. He quickly tried to find anything that may be the unusual energy signature Jarvis was talking about. It didn't take all that long because his AI was very correct about the rapid increase. His wardrobe door was covered with a large mirror, and the image was distorted in it in a way that had nothing to do with the large crack on it. Tony took a cautious step closer to the mirror, watching how his reflection shifted and shivered every so often. He was seriously considering that Jarvis was right about the suit when the mirror darkened, as if it was taken over by a dark storm. He barely moved back a few steps and had no time to react further when the darkness dissolved and an all too familiar dark figure literally fell through the mirror's surface, flew a few feet through the air, and landed on Tony's floor with a very unpleasant-sounding thud. Wide, angry eyes locked with Tony's a second later, and it reminded him of the stray dog that once tried to bite a piece out of him in the back alley of a bar, a beaten and vicious animal. He didn't know what he would have said, because he didn't get the chance to utter a word. The mirror flashed bright in front of him, and Tony ducked the second he saw Loki do the same. He wasn't sure what was hit, maybe his nightstand or his bed. He only heard the sound of cracking wood and Loki's snarl. He pressed his back to the wall he managed to crouch down next to, and his eyes widened when he finally could take a look at what was happening. Two large figures were inside his room, taller than Loki even, and a lot bulkier. For a moment they reminded him of Chitauri, but the skin color was off, and so were the form of their skull and face. The armor and weapons were very similar, though. One of the creatures aimed and shot with his weapon, and there was a flash of gold in answer from Loki that seemed to absorb the attack. It did not stop the attackers, though, and both started shooting at him, which was the cue for Tony to try and dash out of the room and get a suit. It was a good plan, only the moment Loki stopped destroying the attacks and started deflecting them, instead, it became a lot harder to carry it out. Tony did his best to avoid the energy blasts raining down on him, but that also meant that he couldn't just dash to the door unless he wanted to be fried. Large chunks of the wall were falling down on the floor, and one of the cement bags was most likely hit because white dust swirled in the air like a dry fog. Loki seemed to switch from defense to offense because instead of his golden shield now, he was also firing back at the creatures. Without any weapon whatsoever, he didn't need any kind of glow stick to do this sort of thing then. That was good to know. If Tony survived this encounter, he will definitely tell Jarvis to make note of it. One of Loki's blasts managed to push one of the creatures off his feet, and he landed right in front of Tony. Orange eyes locked on his face a moment later. Tony started running towards the door, but the creature charged as well. He almost got there when a vice-like grip closed around his leg and made him fall, only his reflexes saving his face from slamming into the floor. The energy blasts were no longer tearing his room apart, but he didn't have time to think about why. He kicked the creature in the head twice, but the grip didn't loosen on his ankle. The alien started to stand up and pulled Tony closer in the process. He started thrashing, moving, twisting his leg to get away somehow, but he was obviously too physically weak to do any damage. The creature reached up and closed his other hand around his neck, no matter how hard he tried to get away. The hand squeezed hard enough to bruise, but not enough to kill him. Tony gripped his forearm in return, tried to kick him again, but the creature ignored him for the most part and stood up. Fighting became a lot harder when he was dangling in the air, only held by his neck. Well, that was it. He was dead. Well, unless Loki somehow killed these things. The crazy god may have thrown him out of a window, but somehow Tony would have taken his chances with him instead of whoever the hell these aliens were. He glanced around the room to see what was happening. The blasts turned into close-range combat, so it seemed, and Loki was down. He was fighting all right, a lot more successfully than Tony had. The creature fighting him had a large wound on his head and seemed to be missing an eye at this point. He was also bleeding in several other places, and his armor was smoking like it was on fire not that long ago. But eventually, Loki's disadvantage of being on the ground ended the fight, and Tony couldn't help but flinch when the large creature started pummeling his face again and again and again until Loki stopped struggling. The creature holding Tony spoke in a deep growly tone in a language he couldn't understand. The one kneeling over Loki grunted something in answer, then continued to put the god in chains, tying both his hands and ankles. Loki's face was one big swollen bruise, and all that blood around him seeping into the carpet was also not a really nice sight. "You got your god," Tony managed to squeeze out. "Can you just take him a go, maybe?" he asked, although it was very hard to speak. He barely had air, and his vision already started swimming. The creature turned his orange eyes on him again, but didn't say anything. Tony saw a big fist flying toward his face. Then, after a flash of white-hot pain, darkness followed.